Welcome to Season 2 of the More You Know Media and Tech Literacy series, produced by Independent Thinker, LLC. The More You Know Media and Tech Literacy series is a quarterly educational initiative that helps individuals and communities better understand the realities of today's digital ecosystem. The series seeks to enhance public awareness of data privacy and digital rights. In Episode 1, we cover how the government buys your location data. We turn the mic to Tommy and Gina for an insightful discussion about this topic.
Usually when you build a house, you lay a solid concrete foundation, you put up some thick walls, maybe a heavy door, and you decide exactly who gets a key.
Right,
Huh?
yeah. It's your space. It's inherently private.
Exactly. But imagine you wake up one day and realize you actually built that house out of one-way glass.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a disturbing image.
Right. Because you feel perfectly hidden, just sitting on your couch, scrolling through your phone. But outside, there's this entire, sprawling industry standing right on your lawn, just logging what time you opened the fridge, what you watched on TV, and exactly where you were standing when you read your email.
Yeah. And to prove just how fragile that one-way glass is, just look at a stunt recently pulled off by a late-night comedy show in our sources.
Oh, the John Oliver one.
Yes. They legally paid a data broker to draw a digital perimeter right around the United States Capitol building.
Which is just insane to think about.
Right. And they targeted smartphones inside that building that belonged to men aged 45 and up and started serving them ads for things like divorce services and erotic fan fiction.
Wow.
And when the people inside the Capitol actually clicked, the show legally harvested their device IDs, their IP addresses, and their exact physical locations. I mean, they legally bought the ability to track the movements of lawmakers.
Which just completely shatters the illusion that our digital and physical lives are somehow separate. I mean, we operate under this assumption that our daily habits are mundane and invisible.
Yeah, but the underlying infrastructure of the modern internet is, explicitly designed to turn those mundane habits into a highly liquid commodity.
And that is exactly what we are getting into today. So welcome to the deep dive. Our mission for this conversation is to trace the hidden pipeline of your personal data.
Yeah, we are going through a really fascinating stack of investigative reports, congressional testimonies, and even some tech industry manifestos.
Right. We're going to look at the shadow industry harvesting your habits, how federal law enforcement is using that exact same pipeline to just completely bypass constitutional warrants. And finally, which is the wildest part to me, we will look at a movement of tech billionaires hoping to use this surveillance architecture to fundamentally rethink the concept of democratic government itself.
It's a lot of ground to cover.
It is. Okay, let's unpack this. Our listeners already know what a basic web cookie is. We don't need to do a 101 on clearing your browser history.
Sure, yeah.
But the sources point out that the tracking ecosystem has evolved so far beyond just a simple cookie. So how are these companies actually linking what we do in the real physical world to our online profiles?
Well, it relies on a mechanism called the integration layer. And this is facilitated by companies known as data brokers. So let's look at the actual mechanics of this. Say you walk into a brick-and-mortar pharmacy, right?
Okay, physically walking into a store.
Right. And you buy a specific brand of allergy medication using your credit card. You might scan a loyalty card, or maybe the store just has your email on file from an old digital receipt.
Sure, they always ask for your email now.
Exactly. So that transaction is immediately hashed, which basically means it's turned into a cryptographic string of characters, and then it's sent over to a data broker.
Okay, so the broker gets this random string of code.
Yeah, but that broker already has your digital footprint. They have your browser history, your screen resolution, even the specific fonts installed on your laptop.
Wait, my fonts?
Yeah. It's a technique called browser fingerprinting. It makes your device incredibly unique. So they match the hashed email from the pharmacy to your browser fingerprint. And within literally milliseconds, the ad exchange knows you just bought allergy meds in person, and they start bidding to serve you ads for tissues on your phone.
That is, it explains a really memorable anecdote from one of the investigative pieces in our stack.
Oh, the baby wipes story.
Yes. So there was this single childless financial planner. He opened a new physical office and bought exactly one canister of baby wipes from a big box store, literally just to clean off some desks.
Right. Completely innocent offline purchase.
Exactly. But almost immediately, he was bombarded with targeted online ads for baby products. Like, The algorithm detected the offline purchase, stripped away all the human context, and instantly just threw them into a new parent marketing bucket.
What's fascinating there is how these brokers operate essentially as shadow credit bureaus for your habits.
Yeah.
But they exist completely outside the regulatory frameworks that govern actual credit scores.
Because nobody is checking their work.
Right. Brokers like Epsilon or Axiom, they aggregate billions of these seemingly trivial data points to place you into hyper-specific behavioral segments. I mean, the sources highlight actual industry names for these lists, things like boomers and boomerangs or couples with clout.
And some of those sound like, harmless marketing jargon.
Right.
But the sources also reveal the darker side of this categorization.
Yeah, it gets really grim.
It does. They sell lists categorized as suffering seniors, or lists targeting people with specific ailments like depression, or even domestic violence victims, or people seeking payday loans.
Right. It completely crosses a line when algorithms start categorizing human vulnerabilities.
Absolutely. And there is one deeply unsettling case in the reports where the retailer OfficeMax sent a piece of physical mail to a customer, but the envelope was addressed to the man's name, followed literally by the words, "Daughter killed in car crash."
Which perfectly illustrates the mechanical nature of these databases. I mean, to a human, that is a profound tragedy. But to the data broker's integration layer, it's just a categorical string attached to a consumer profile.
Yeah.
It's treated with the exact same weight as a zip code or like a preference for brand name paper towels.
But let me push back on this a little bit, because whenever privacy advocates raise these alarms, tech companies deploy the exact same defense.
They say it's anonymous.
Right. They claim the data is de-identified. They say they strip off the names, the phone numbers, the social security numbers. So if it is just an anonymized string of numbers floating in a server somewhere, is it really a threat to us as individuals?
Well, the sources spend a lot of time completely dismantling the myth of anonymization. True anonymization in a rich data set is basically a mathematical impossibility.
How so?
It comes down to combinatorics. You don't need a name to identify someone, you just need the intersection of a few unique traits. Like, a widely cited study in our sources proves that 99.9% of Americans can be correctly re-identified using just 15 basic demographic attributes.
Wait, really? Just 15 data points? I probably generate 15 data points before I even finish my morning coffee.
Exactly. If a data set shows someone's rough age, their gender, their marital status, and like the zip code where their phone sleeps at night, the pool of potential matches narrows so rapidly that you are literally the only person left standing. Yeah. The sources bring up this notorious incident from 2006, where AOL released a massive trove of supposedly anonymized search records for academic research. They replaced the usernames with random numbers.
Okay.
It took investigative reporters just a few hours to figure out that user 4417749 was a 62-year-old woman in Georgia named Thelma Arnold.
Just from her searches?
Just from looking at the combination of her search queries. Stuff about her specific town, her dogs, and her friends. That was it.
So if anonymization is essentially a myth, then the real goldmine for these brokers isn't just knowing what I'm searching for online, it's knowing exactly where I am standing when I search for it.
Yes.
And that leads us straight into geolocation data.
Right, because geolocation captures the actual context of your life in real time. Like for an advertising agency, it's all about finding the moment of persuasion.
Right, like if they know your phone's GPS coordinates are currently inside a gym, they can just serve you an ad for protein powder right then and there.
Exactly. But as our sources reveal, the ultimate customer for this hyper-precise location data is increasingly not an advertiser at all. It is law enforcement.
Which introduces one of the most controversial legal tools we found in the research, the geofence warrant.
Yeah, this is huge.
I want to build on a really helpful analogy used by the privacy advocates in our sources. A traditional search warrant works like a fishing line. The police have a specific suspect, they convince a judge they have probable cause, and they drop a line in the water to get that one specific person's phone records.
Right.
But a geofence warrant is a massive tuna net. They don't know who the suspect is, so they just ask a tech company to cast a digital net over an entire geographic area and haul in the location data of every single device that happened to be in that space.
And the mechanics of how companies like Google process these warrants are crucial to understand. So they maintain these databases, like Google Sensor Vault, that log the location history of hundreds of millions of devices. Constantly. So when law enforcement serves a geofence warrant, they define a polygon on a map and a specific time window. The tech company first hands over an anonymized list of every device in that polygon. Then, police sift through the movements of those anonymous devices, look for patterns that seem suspicious, And then they compel the company to de-anonymize the specific devices they want to investigate further.
But the risk of catching completely innocent people in that net just seems incredibly high.
Oh, it is.
We see this in the Virginia bank robbery case in the reports, the Okello-Shaftry case. The police didn't have a lead, so they drew a big digital circle around the bank. But that polygon accidentally included an entire nearby church.
Yep.
So suddenly, anyone sitting in the pews during the time of the robbery is swept up in a federal criminal investigation.
And there are also documented cases in New York City where a violent altercation broke out between a political group and protesters. When the local precinct failed to make arrests at the scene, the district attorney later issued a geofence warrant for the entire block.
Just everyone in the area.
Everyone. They scooped up the data of innocent constituents, people in taxis, people just walking their dogs. I mean, it flips the entire concept of an investigation upside down.
Yeah.
Instead of using evidence to identify a suspect, you just grab everybody's data and sift through it to find a pattern that looks like guilt.
If you look at American history, this sounds exactly like the general warrants used by British authorities in the 1700s.
Oh, absolutely.
It's the blank checks that allowed officers to search anyone, anywhere, just to see what they could find. It is literally why the Fourth Amendment was written. And the Supreme Court actually just ruled 6-3 that these geofence sweeps do constitute a search under the Fourth Amendment, and they generally require a traditional warrant, which is a massive shift.
It is a massive shift. But this raises an important question, though. If the courts and state lawmakers are beginning to restrict the use of geofence warrants, how does law enforcement maintain this level of surveillance on the population?
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. They don't demand the data anymore. They just open their wallets and buy it from the very data brokers we were just talking about.
Right. It is a massive legal loophole, and it's rooted in something called the third-party doctrine.
Break that down for us.
So historically, the courts have ruled that if you willingly share your information with a third party, like dialing some phone number and letting the telecom company route the call, you lose your reasonable expectation of privacy for those specific digits.
Which makes sense in a landline context.
Right. The issue is that this doctrine was created in the 1970s for analog bank records and landlines. Today, courts and lawmakers are struggling with how to apply it when the third party is like a flashlight app or weather widget that secretly logs your precise GPS coordinates every 3 seconds.
And the mechanics of how that simple weather app gets your data to the government is fascinating. The sources detail the use of SDKs, or software development kits.
Yeah, these are everywhere.
So an app developer wants to make a free weather app, but they need to make money. So they embed a piece of code in SDK provided by a data broker. The developer gets paid, the user gets free weather forecasts, and the broker gets a silent stream of GPS pings.
Exactly.
And according to congressional testimonies in our stack, federal agencies lean into this hard. Like a former defense official named Kash Patel straight up admitted to Congress that the FBI buys commercial location data en masse. We also see reports of ICE and Customs and Border Protection purchasing it.
And the supply chain is just intentionally opaque. There was this high-profile case involving a popular app called Muslim Pro, which millions of people downloaded to know when to pray.
Right.
Well, the developers embedded an SDK. The location data flowed to a broker. That broker sold it to a defense contractor. And eventually, the data of everyday people praying ended up being utilized by the U.S. military.
Wow.
And the original app developer often has absolutely no idea that the government is the end buyer.
Which brings us right back to that John Oliver stunt from the beginning. It proved that you don't need a warrant, you don't need a judge, you don't even need a security clearance to monitor the halls of Congress. You just need a corporate credit card.
Pretty much.
So the obvious question is, why isn't there a comprehensive federal privacy law in the United States to stop this? I mean, we see the GDPR in Europe, we see the CCPA in California. Why are federal lawmakers leaving themselves exposed?
Well, the investigative panels point to two primary factors here. First, the data broker industry operates a massive lobbying apparatus in Washington, and it basically rivals the spending of big tech giants.
Money talks.
Always.
Mm-hmm.
But second, and perhaps more structurally, political campaigns rely heavily on this exact same data infrastructure.
Oh, to target voters.
Exactly. They use these micro-targeted behavioral buckets to identify swing voters, map out their anxieties, and optimize their ad spending. So lawmakers are structurally disincentivized from dismantling the machine that literally helps them win elections.
Okay, so let's look at the sheer scale of this for a second. We're talking about billions of GPS pings, purchase histories, and app usage logs, all just flowing into government servers. But raw data on that scale is essentially just noise, right?
It's totally unreadable on its own.
Right. A spreadsheet with 10 billion rows is useless to an agent in the field unless they have the tools to actually make sense of it. And that brings us to the tech companies providing the plumbing for this system. The sources focus heavily on Palantir.
Yeah, Palantir is a really interesting player here. They're a highly specialized software company initially funded by In-Q-Tel, which is the venture capital arm of the CIA.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. And their core value proposition isn't necessarily collecting the data itself. It is providing the integration engine that ingests thousands of separate, messy databases and forces them to talk to each other. They use a process called entity resolution.
Explain how that works in practice.
Okay, imagine law enforcement has a partial license plate from a toll camera, right? Plus a messy DMV record with a typo in the name, an incomplete immigration file, and a purchased location ping from a weather app.
All totally disconnected pieces of information.
Exactly. Historically, an analyst would spend weeks trying to figure out if those 4 data points belong to the same person. Palantir software uses probabilistic matching to instantly synthesize those disparate fragments into a single unified visual profile of an individual.
Which is wild. And the sources highlight an application Palantir actually built for IC called the Elite app. It effectively takes that synthesized profile we just talked about and puts it into an interface that looks basically like a standard map app on a smartphone.
Yeah, it's very user-friendly.
Right. So a federal officer can open the app out in the field and see a target's photo, their known associates, their past addresses, and get this, a predictive algorithmic confidence score, estimating exactly where that person is likely standing at that very moment.
And we are seeing this architectural model exported globally now. According to the reports, the UK's Metropolitan Police are aggressively pushing forward with Palantir integrations. They're aiming to fuse it with drone surveillance and live facial recognition networks across London.
Just full sci-fi surveillance.
Basically. And the privacy advocates in our sources point out that this is happening despite really well-documented risks of racial bias in the underlying predictive algorithms. The technological capability is simply outpacing democratic oversight.
But the sources reveal a massive pivot happening right now that feels like a watershed moment. Palantir is no longer just satisfied with defense and intelligence contracts. They are actively pitching a new platform, called AIP, to the commercial advertising sector.
Yeah, this is a huge shift. They're essentially taking the military-grade artificial intelligence used to optimize battlefield logistics and track targets, and they're telling corporate ad agencies, hey, we can use this exact same architecture to optimize your programmatic ad sales and track consumers.
Wait, so the underlying software logic that's used to manage deportation logistics or analyze drone data is now being sold to figure out how to more efficiently serve us ads for toothpaste?
Yeah. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the sources suggest that the line between the military-industrial complex and the advertising-industrial complex has just dissolved completely.
Mm-hmm.
The tools of national security and the tools of consumer marketing are now running on a shared technological foundation.
Which brings us to the final and frankly most complex piece of this puzzle, because we really have to ask, what happens when the tech elite who build and control this omnipotent data infrastructure decide they no longer just want to serve governments as contractors? What happens when they decide they want to use this infrastructure to replace the government?
Yeah, this is where the deep dives into the network state and the sovereign individual movement become really critical to understand. We are looking at a well-funded ideological push among prominent Silicon Valley venture capitalists, figures like Peter Thiel, Joe Lonsdale, and Patry Friedman.
Right.
According to the investigative reports, their stated goal is to gradually replace democratic nation-state governance with privatized, CEO-run corporate societies.
And the foundational text for this movement, according to the sources, is a book published back in 1997 called The Sovereign Individual. It essentially predicted that cryptography and advanced automation would make traditional governments obsolete.
Yeah, they saw it coming.
They really did. And the authors of the reports analyzing this movement note that these tech elites view democracy not as like a moral imperative, but just as an inefficient resource allocator. They believe the wealthy should be able to utilize technology to escape the burdens of taxation, regulation, and democratic consensus entirely.
And the sources detail how they are actively attempting to materialize these theories today. You have projects like the Seasteading Institute, initially funded by Thiel, which aim to build floating societies in international waters, just completely beyond the reach of any nation's laws.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. You also have experiments like Sandy Springs, Georgia, which temporarily outsourced nearly all of its municipal services to private corporate contractors. And you have initiatives like Prospera, which is a for-profit charter city established in Honduras operating under its own proprietary corporate legal framework.
But I have to push back here. A floating city in the ocean sounds like a philosophical thought experiment. Is this just the pipe dream of eccentric billionaires? Or do the sources present this as a tangible, imminent shift in public policy?
The investigative journalists behind these deep dives definitely frame it as a highly tangible, well-funded policy movement, especially as their strategy has evolved from just building islands to funding what is called GovTech.
What does that mean exactly?
Well, companies like OpenJoe are building the private data infrastructure for local municipalities all across the United States. The reports note a coordinated effort to make private tech platforms the literal operating system of the state. Simultaneously, lobbying groups tied to these figures are pushing for the creation of prosperity zones on American soil, which is basically federal land that would be carved out and managed by corporations as completely deregulated havens.
And the investigative authors explicitly point out the rhetoric being used to justify this shift. They note that proponents of this movement frequently frame traditional democratic concepts, like public infrastructure, social safety nets, or broad civic equity as outdated, or they label them as woke ideology that threatens progress.
Exactly.
The sources even highlight think tanks associated with this movement proposing radical policies, like forcing unhoused populations into labor camps. It's a heavy shift.
It is. According to the analysis in our stack, this represents a calculated effort to shift society away from a model of citizen representation toward a model of consumer subscription.
Wow, consumer subscription instead of citizenship.
Yeah, and the connective tissue tying this all together is the data pipeline we've been discussing this whole time. Because, think about it. To run a hyper-efficient, privatized corporate state without democratic feedback, you fundamentally require the ability to monitor, manage, and predict the behavior of the population with absolute precision.
Right.
The surveillance apparatus built by data brokers and co-opted by law enforcement is the exact technological toolset required to actually realize this vision.
Okay, let's take a step back and just look at the whole board here because the through line is incredible. We started by looking at how an offline purchase at a pharmacy is instantly mapped to your browser fingerprint by data brokers who are acting as shadow credit bureaus. Then we explored how law enforcement utilizes that exact same commercial data market to bypass the Fourth Amendment and cast a digital tuna net over our physical locations. We saw how companies like Palantir provide the artificial intelligence to fuse those billions of data points into predictive maps. And finally, the sources showed us how the architects of that technology envision a future where democratic governance is just replaced by privatized, data-driven corporate zones.
It is a staggering pipeline when you lay it out like that.
So what does this all mean for you? When privacy experts talk about solutions, they usually point to individual choices. They advise us to use secure browsers, to pay in cash, to turn off location services, or to just leave our primary phones at home if we are attending a sensitive medical appointment or a political protest.
Which is all good advice, generally speaking.
It is, but look at the trajectory of the infrastructure we just unpacked. Our most basic civic functions are becoming inextricably intertwined with these tracking technologies. We are seeing municipalities mandate smartphone apps to pay for street parking or access public transit.
Yeah, you can't even get around town without it.
Exactly. We see digital portals required to communicate with public schools. We see government services digitizing access to food benefits and healthcare records. So here is something to chew on as you navigate this digital architecture. As the walls of that one-way glass house close in, and as the required tools for participating in modern society increasingly run on this surveillance pipeline, in a world where simply existing in a public space generates a commodity to be bought and sold, is opting out even a real choice anymore? Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the hidden mechanics of our digital world, and we'll catch you next time.
For more episodes related to media, social media, tech, and privacy, visit our YouTube channel, Independent Thinker LLC.